Daniel was not born lazy. As a child, he had curiosity in his eyes and questions on his lips. He used to imagine big things for himself, dreaming of a future where he would be successful, respected, and independent. But as the years passed, comfort slowly replaced curiosity. Little by little, effort felt heavy, and ease felt sweet. Without realizing it, Daniel began choosing what was easy instead of what was right. Every morning followed the same pattern. The alarm rang, sharp and demanding, cutting through the silence of his room. Daniel opened one eye, groaned softly, and pressed the snooze button. 5 more minutes, he told himself. His bed was warm, his blanket felt safe, and the world outside seemed too demanding. Those 5 minutes turned into 10, then 20, then an entire hour. When he finally stood up, the rush began, not because he was productive, but because he was already late. Daniel convinced himself that he worked better under pressure. He said this so often that he started believing it. In reality, pressure only made him anxious and careless. Tasks were delayed, responsibilities were ignored, and promises were broken, not because he couldn't do them, but because starting felt uncomfortable. He always planned to change from tomorrow, but tomorrow remained a distant idea, never a real day. His room reflected his inner state. Clothes lay scattered, papers piled up, and unfinished work gathered dust. Whenever he looked around, he felt a slight guilt, but instead of fixing anything, he escaped into distractions. His phone became his closest companion. Hours disappeared into scrolling, watching, and doing nothing of value. Time passed quickly, yet his life stayed still. Daniel's mind was full of excuses. He told himself that life was unfair, that opportunities were limited, that successful people were just lucky. These thoughts made him feel better for a moment, but deep inside, a quiet voice reminded him of the truth. He was capable of more. He just refused to try. Friends noticed the change before he did. They talked about goals, progress, and plans, while Daniel nodded and smiled, pretending to relate. He laughed with them, but inside, he felt disconnected. When they invited him to learn something new or work on a project together, he declined, saying he was tired or busy. In truth, he was afraid of effort and failure. At work, Daniel's potential was obvious at first. He understood tasks quickly and had good ideas, but he rarely acted on them. He delayed assignments, arrived late, and missed chances to stand out. His manager offered guidance and reminders, but Daniel always promised improvement without delivering results. Slowly, expectations from him dropped. People stopped relying on him. Daniel didn't notice how dangerous that was. He felt relieved when fewer tasks came his way. Less responsibility meant less pressure. What he didn't understand was that comfort was quietly closing doors. Each missed opportunity was a step backward, even though he felt like he was standing still. In the evenings, Daniel often sat alone, staring at the ceiling, thinking about life. He wondered why he felt empty despite doing so little. Sometimes, motivation appeared suddenly, late at night, filling him with ideas and determination. He made plans in his head, imagining a new version of himself. But morning always erased those thoughts. When action was required, motivation vanished. Deep down, Daniel feared effort because effort meant accountability. Trying meant he could fail, and failure scared him more than stagnation. So he chose the safer path of doing nothing, not realizing that doing nothing was the greatest risk of all. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Time kept moving forward, but Daniel remained trapped in the same routine. Comfort wrapped around him like a soft chain, invisible yet unbreakable. Laziness did not shout or threaten him. It whispered gently, telling him to rest, to wait, to delay. Daniel believed he was in control. He believed he could change any time he wanted. But control is proven by action, not intention. Without knowing it, he was slowly handing his life over to habits that asked nothing from him and gave nothing back. And while Daniel slept peacefully each night, laziness stayed awake, quietly preparing to take everything he had once dreamed of becoming. Daniel's life continued in the same slow, heavy rhythm, as if every day was a copy of the one before it. He woke up tired, even after sleeping too much, and went to bed exhausted without having done anything meaningful. His body rested, but his mind felt worn out. There was a constant weight on his chest, a feeling he could not explain, a mix of regret and fear that followed him everywhere. He began to avoid mirrors. Whenever he caught his reflection, he saw someone older than his age, someone whose eyes no longer carried excitement. The confidence he once had was fading, replaced by self-doubt. He told himself it was just a phase, that everyone felt lost sometimes. But deep inside, he knew this was more than confusion. It was the result of too many ignored responsibilities and too many delayed decisions. Money problems soon appeared. Small expenses that he once ignored now felt like heavy burdens. Daniel started counting every coin, worrying about every bill. Instead of motivating him to act, the stress pushed him deeper into avoidance. He spent hours thinking about what he should do, but very few minutes actually doing anything. Thinking felt productive, but it was only another form of escape. His phone became both a shield and a prison. Whenever anxiety rose, he reached for it. Videos played one after another, stories that had nothing to do with his life but kept him distracted from his own thoughts. He laughed at jokes, watched other people succeed, and compared his life silently. Each comparison hurt, yet he continued. It was easier to watch others' lives than to build his own life. Family gatherings became uncomfortable. Relatives asked simple questions about work and plans, and Daniel answered with vague words. "I'm figuring things out," he said. "Something will come up soon." These sentences sounded hopeful, but they were empty. He avoided eye contact, afraid that someone might see through him. He felt like a disappointment, even though no one openly said it. At night, when the house was quiet, Daniel's thoughts became loud. Regret visited him often during those hours. He remembered chances he had wasted, advice he had ignored, and moments when he had chosen comfort over growth. He promised himself, again and again, that tomorrow would be different. These promises gave him temporary relief, allowing him to sleep without facing the truth. But tomorrow never brought change. The same cycle repeated, and each repetition made it harder to break. Laziness was no longer just a habit, it had become a part of his identity. Daniel started believing that this was simply who he was. That belief was more dangerous than laziness itself. One afternoon, Daniel received a message from an old friend. The friend had recently achieved something Daniel once dreamed about. The message was kind and encouraging, but it made Daniel feel small. He congratulated his friend, then put the phone away and sat silently. He felt a sharp pain in his chest, not from jealousy, but from realization. That could have been me, he thought. The difference was not talent, luck, or intelligence. It was effort. For the first time, Daniel allowed himself to feel the full weight of his choices. He saw laziness not as rest, but as avoidance. Not as comfort, but as fear. He realized that every time he delayed action, he was choosing short-term ease over long-term pain. That understanding hurt, but it was honest. Still, understanding alone did not change everything. The next day, Daniel tried to be productive, but his energy disappeared quickly. His mind searched for distractions, and his body resisted movement. He felt frustrated and angry with himself. Why is change so hard? He wondered. He wanted transformation without discomfort, progress without struggle. But life did not work that way. Daniel began to notice how laziness affected his emotions. He felt irritated easily, lost patience quickly, and avoided difficult conversations. The less he did, the worse he felt about himself. The worse he felt, the less he wanted to do. It was a silent loop, spinning endlessly. He remembered something his teacher once said, discipline is choosing what you want most over what you want now. That sentence returned to him many times. He realized he had been choosing what he wanted now, sleep, ease, distraction, over what he wanted most, respect, stability, peace. Daniel sat down one evening with a blank notebook. The page looked intimidating. He didn't write goals or dreams. He simply wrote the truth. He wrote about his fears, his laziness, and his regret. Each word felt heavy, but freeing. For the first time, he stopped lying to himself. As he closed the notebook, Daniel understood something important. Laziness had not destroyed his life yet, but it was close. Very close. And if he continued on this path, there would be nothing dramatic or sudden about the ending. Just a quiet life filled with what-ifs and if-onlys. That thought stayed with him as he lay in bed. Sleep did not come easily that night. His mind was no longer numbed by distractions. It was awake, aware, and uncomfortable. But beneath the discomfort, there was something new, clarity. For the first time in a long while, Daniel didn't promise himself that tomorrow would be perfect. He promised something smaller, something more realistic. Tomorrow, he would try. And even that small decision felt like the beginning of a long, difficult, but necessary journey. The next morning arrived quietly, without any dramatic change in the world around Daniel. The same light slipped through the window, the same sounds floated in from outside, and the same alarm rang on his phone. But something inside him felt different. The fear of continuing the same life had grown stronger than the comfort of staying still. He lay in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling, listening to his thoughts argue with each other. One voice asked him to rest, to delay, to start later. Another voice, weaker but steadier, reminded him of the empty feeling that always followed inaction. Daniel sat up slowly. His body felt heavy, as if it were resisting movement. He noticed how strong the habit of doing nothing had become. Even the simplest action felt difficult. But he remembered his promise. Not to be perfect, just to try. He stood up, made his bed with careless hands, and opened the window. Fresh air entered the room, carrying a sense of reality with it. It was a small act, but it mattered. The day did not suddenly become productive or inspiring. Daniel struggled through simple tasks. His mind wandered constantly, searching for escape. Several times, he almost picked up his phone, his fingers moving automatically. Each time, he stopped himself and placed it face down on the table. The silence felt uncomfortable, but it forced him to stay present. He began to realize how often he used noise to avoid his own thoughts. As hours passed, Daniel felt mentally tired in a new way. This exhaustion came from effort, not avoidance. It was unfamiliar, but strangely satisfying. He completed a few small tasks that he had delayed for weeks. None of them were impressive, but each one felt like a quiet victory. He noticed a slight change in his mood, a small lift that came from keeping a promise to himself. In the following days, Daniel tried to repeat these small actions. Some mornings were easier than others. On certain days, laziness returned with full force, whispering that his efforts were pointless, that he would fail anyway. On those days, Daniel often slipped back into old habits, wasting hours and feeling guilty afterward. But something had changed. He no longer ignored the guilt. He examined it. He asked himself why he felt the way he did. Daniel began to understand that laziness was closely connected to fear. Fear of failure. Fear of judgment. Fear of discovering his own limits. Doing nothing protected him from those fears, but it also protected him from growth. This realization didn't remove the fear, but it made it visible. And once something is visible, it can be faced. He started setting very small goals, almost too small to fail. Wake up at a certain time. Read a few pages. Apply for one opportunity. Some days, he succeeded. Other days, he didn't. But instead of giving up completely, he learned to continue the next day without punishing himself. This was new. In the past, one failure was enough to send him back into full avoidance. Daniel noticed changes in his thoughts. He spoke to himself differently. The harsh inner voice that called him useless began to soften. In its place, a more honest voice appeared, one that acknowledged effort, even when results were missing. He realized how deeply self-criticism had fueled his laziness. When he believed he was already a failure, trying felt pointless. Time began to feel different. Days no longer disappeared without a trace. Even when he didn't accomplish much, he remembered what he had done. His life started leaving marks again. This awareness made him more careful with how he spent his hours. He wasn't suddenly disciplined, but he was more conscious. One evening, Daniel went for a walk. The sky was changing colors, and the air was cool. As he walked, he noticed people around him, some rushing, some laughing, some lost in thought. He realized that everyone carried struggles, even those who seemed successful. This thought comforted him. He wasn't uniquely broken. He had simply been stuck. Daniel reflected on the past months and saw them clearly for the first time. Laziness had not been a lack of energy, but a lack of direction. Without a clear reason to move, staying still felt easier. Slowly, he began to imagine a different future, not a perfect one, but a better one. A life where he respected himself enough to show up, even when he didn't feel like it. The journey was not smooth. There were days when he felt hopeless again, when progress seemed invisible. On those days, he reminded himself of where he had been. He remembered the empty nights, the constant avoidance, the quiet shame. Compared to that, effort felt like progress, even when it hurt. Daniel started to accept discomfort as part of growth. He stopped waiting for motivation and focused on routine. Motivation, he learned, came after action, not before it. This understanding changed how he approached his days. He no longer asked himself how he felt before starting. He started first, and let feelings follow. Gradually, opportunities began to appear, not because the world had changed, but because Daniel had. He noticed things he would have ignored before. He responded to messages. He followed through on commitments. People started trusting him again, slowly and carefully. At night, when Daniel lay in bed, he still felt tired. But it was a clean tiredness, one that allowed him to sleep without regret. His mind no longer raced with thoughts of wasted time. Instead, it reviewed small efforts, small wins, and lessons learned. Daniel knew he had a long way to go. Laziness had not disappeared, and it probably never would completely. But it no longer controlled him. It was something he managed, not something he obeyed. As he closed his eyes, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, hope. Not loud or dramatic, but quiet and steady. And for the first time, that felt enough. Daniel's progress did not follow a straight line. Some days felt steady and strong, while others felt like he was standing at the edge of the same old hole, trying not to fall back in. Laziness did not disappear, it changed its shape. Instead of pulling him into endless sleep or distraction, it now tried to convince him that his small efforts were meaningless. It whispered that others were far ahead, that starting late meant he would always remain behind. These thoughts were heavy, but Daniel was learning not to accept every thought as truth. He began to notice how much patience real change required. In the past, he wanted instant results. If improvement did not show quickly, he lost interest. Now he understood that growth was quiet and slow, often invisible at first. Like roots growing under the soil, effort worked beneath the surface long before anything appeared above it. Remembering this helped him continue on days when nothing seemed to improve. Daniel made mistakes, sometimes repeating old habits without realizing it. There were evenings when he wasted hours again, staring at screens, telling himself he deserved rest. The difference now was that he didn't let one bad evening become a bad week. He learned to stop the spiral early. Instead of drowning in guilt, he accepted responsibility and returned to his routine the next day. This ability to reset became one of his greatest strengths. As time passed, Daniel became more aware of how his environment affected him. He removed small distractions from his space and added reminders of his goals. A simple note on his desk read, "Do something today." It wasn't a demand for perfection, just a reminder to move forward. Some days, something meant a single task. Other days, it meant hours of focused work. Both counted. His confidence grew quietly. He spoke with more certainty, walked with more awareness, and began trusting his ability to handle discomfort. He realized that discipline was not about being harsh with himself, but about caring enough to do what needed to be done. This new understanding changed how he viewed effort. It was no longer punishment. It was self-respect. Daniel started rebuilding relationships he had neglected. He replied to messages instead of avoiding them. He apologized where necessary, not with excuses, but with honesty. Some people welcomed him back easily. Others kept their distance, unsure if he had truly changed. Daniel accepted this without resentment. He knew trust took time to rebuild, just like confidence. One day, while organizing old papers, Daniel found a list of goals he had written years ago. Reading it felt strange. Some dreams no longer mattered to him, while others still stirred something inside. He didn't feel sadness reading the list. Instead, he felt clarity. He realized that it was okay to let go of certain dreams, but not okay to let go of himself. Daniel's understanding of success shifted. He stopped measuring his life by comparing it to others. Instead, he compared himself to who he had been before. The difference was noticeable. He was more present, more honest, and more willing to face discomfort. These changes were not visible to everyone, but they mattered deeply to him. There were moments when fear returned strongly, especially when new opportunities appeared. Fear told him he was not ready, that he would fail, that he should wait. This time, Daniel recognized fear as a sign of growth. If something scared him, it usually meant it mattered. He learned to move forward while feeling afraid, instead of waiting for courage to arrive. Slowly, Daniel's days filled with purpose rather than avoidance. Even rest felt different now. It was intentional, not an escape. He learned to stop when needed and start again without losing momentum. Balance became possible only because he was no longer running from responsibility. At night, Daniel often reflected on how close he had come to losing himself. Laziness had nearly convinced him that he was incapable, unworthy, and stuck forever. Daniel often thought about how close he had come to losing everything without realizing it. There was no single disaster, no loud moment that warned him. It had been a slow fading, a quiet surrender to ease and delay. Now, as he looked back, he understood how dangerous that silence had been. Change had not arrived like a storm, it had come like a long walk in the dark, guided only by small steps and steady effort. His days now had structure, not strict or overwhelming, but gentle and clear. He woke up with intention, even when he didn't feel like it. Some mornings, the old heaviness returned, pressing against his chest, reminding him of how easy it would be to stay in bed. On those mornings, Daniel didn't argue with himself. He simply moved. He had learned that action often came before feeling, not after it. There were still moments of doubt. Sometimes he questioned whether his progress was enough, whether he was moving fast enough, whether it was too late to build the life he wanted. These thoughts appeared quietly, usually when he was tired. Instead of letting them control him, Daniel acknowledged them and continued. He no longer needed certainty to move forward. He only needed commitment. Daniel became more comfortable with the idea of effort as a daily practice rather than a one-time decision. He understood that discipline was not about forcing himself every moment, but about returning to the path whenever he stepped away. This understanding gave him peace. He stopped fearing mistakes because he trusted his ability to correct them. As his consistency improved, opportunities slowly grew around him. He was given more responsibility at work, not because he was the most talented, but because he was reliable. People noticed that when Daniel said he would do something, he followed through. That trust was something he had once lost, and earning it back felt more meaningful than any quick success. Daniel's self-talk changed in a deep way. Where he once used harsh words, he now used honest ones. He held himself accountable without tearing himself down. This balance allowed him to push forward without burning out. He learned that kindness toward himself did not weaken discipline, it strengthened it. In quiet moments, Daniel reflected on the lessons his journey had taught him. He learned that laziness often hides pain, fear, or confusion. Ignoring those feelings only gives laziness more power. Facing them with patience and action slowly takes that power away. He learned that waiting for the right time is often just another form of delay. The right time begins with the first small step. Daniel also learned the value of ordinary days. Not every day brought progress that could be measured or celebrated. Some days were simply about maintaining momentum, about not moving backward. He learned to respect those days just as much as the productive ones. Consistency, he realized, was built in these quiet moments. One evening, Daniel met someone who reminded him of his past self. The person spoke about dreams with excitement but avoided action with excuses. Daniel listened carefully, not with judgment, but with understanding. He saw his old reflection in those words. When asked for advice, Daniel did not offer complex solutions. He said simply, "Start with something small, and do it even when you don't feel ready." Walking home that night, Daniel felt gratitude. Not because life was perfect, but because it was honest. He no longer lived in constant avoidance. He faced discomfort directly and trusted himself to handle it. That trust had changed everything. There were still challenges ahead. Daniel knew that growth never truly ends. Laziness would return in different forms, testing him in new ways. But he was no longer afraid of it. He had learned how to respond. He had learned how to begin again. At night, as he prepared for sleep, Daniel felt a calm he had never known before. His mind was not filled with regret or unfinished thoughts. Instead, it held quiet awareness. He knew he was moving forward, even if slowly. And that knowledge allowed him to rest deeply. Daniel understood now that laziness had nearly ruined his life, not because it made him weak, but because it made him wait. Waiting had cost him time, confidence, and peace. Action, even imperfect action, had given those things back. As he closed his eyes, Daniel felt a quiet pride. Not pride in achievement, but pride in effort. He had chosen responsibility over comfort, truth over excuses, and movement over fear. That choice, repeated day after day, had changed the direction of his life. And in that quiet, steady transformation, Daniel found something more powerful than motivation. He found discipline, self-respect, and the courage to keep going.